I couldn't have guessed that a simple knock on the door in the middle of the night would change everything. My heart races just thinking about it now. It wasn't just the knock. It was what happened after that. But before we dive into it, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let me know. It's always fascinating to see where these stories travel. Now let me take you back to that night. My name's Sarah, and this happened just a few months ago. I've lived a pretty quiet life, maybe a little too quiet for someone my age, but that's how I like it. I'd always cherished the calm, the routine. I spend most evenings watching TV, curled up with a book, or simply gazing out the window at the world I once knew so well. My children have grown, and my husband passed some years ago, so it's just me and the memories now. And Charles, well, Charles is my grandson. He's 25, tall, with kind eyes, and we've always had a special bond. But that night, Charles wasn't supposed to be here. He had his own life, his own friends, his own plans. I thought I was just going to settle in with a cup of tea and the latest episode of a show I've been following when I heard the knock. It was soft at first, like a hesitant tap, like he wasn't sure if I'd be awake. I pulled myself out of my chair and walked slowly toward the door, the creaks of the wooden floor beneath my slippers somehow making the whole house feel even quieter. When I opened it, I saw him standing there, his face a mixture of concern and something I couldn't quite place. "Grandma, can I come in? I need to talk." I didn't need to ask what was on his mind. Something had happened. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't the type to ask for help easily, and his sudden visit in the dead of night spoke volumes. "Of course, Charles. Come in. You know you're always welcome here." He stepped inside, and I motioned for him to sit on the old, worn couch that had seen so many family moments, both happy and sad. As he settled in, I took my usual spot beside him, close enough to offer comfort, but far enough to give him space. He didn't speak at first. His eyes wandered around the room, as if searching for something to say or perhaps something to make sense of. I waited patiently, my hands folded neatly in my lap, knowing that whatever it was, he'd tell me in his own time. Finally, he broke the silence. "Grandma, I've been thinking about a lot of things. About life, about us. And I don't know how to say this, but I need to say it." His voice was shaky, his words carrying more weight than I was prepared for. I nodded. "Take your time, Charles. I'm here for you." The silence stretched between us, each second like a lifetime. The light from the dim lamp above flickered ever so slightly, casting soft shadows that danced around us. It was in that quiet moment, with only the sound of our breaths filling the space, that something inside me shifted. I wasn't sure what was coming next, but I knew this wasn't just any conversation. This was a turning point. Then he looked at me. And that look, it's still etched in my mind. It was as though he was trying to find the courage to say something, but his gaze softened. I've been struggling with how much I've taken you for granted, Grandma. And I know it sounds strange, but there's a part of me that's always felt like I haven't truly understood what it means to be close to someone until now." His words hung in the air, the weight of them pressing down on me. I didn't know where this conversation was headed, but I could feel something shifting between us. Something deeper than what we had ever shared. Something unspoken, something more than family ties. But before I could respond, he reached out, his hand lightly brushing against mine. It wasn't anything grand. It wasn't a confession or a grand gesture, but in that moment, it felt like everything. It felt like he was saying more than just those few words. He was opening up a door to something bigger, something that would take us both to places we didn't expect. I looked at him, really looked at him, And for the first time in a long time, I saw him not as my grandson, but as a man who had carried burdens I didn't know about. And somehow, in that silent exchange, everything changed. "Charles," I started, but my voice faltered. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say. There was so much running through my mind, but I couldn't find the right words. So instead, I squeezed his hand, silently telling him that I understood. I had no idea what this moment meant yet, but I felt the bond between us strengthen. The kind of bond that comes from truly seeing each other, not just in the easy moments, but in the hard ones too. And so, there we sat, both of us in the quiet of the night, connected in a way we had never been before. Whatever was about to happen, I knew it would change us both. This wasn't just a late-night visit. This was the beginning of something new, something neither of us had expected, but both needed more than we realized. The silence between us felt different now, almost heavier, as though the weight of unspoken truths hung in the air. Charles hadn't let go of my hand, and I didn't want him to. It was comforting, like a thread between us that, in that moment, I felt I could never pull away from. "Grandma," he began, his voice trembling again, "I've been feeling lost. I've always had this idea of what my life should be, you know. The career, the relationships, the whole picture. But it's like, no matter how hard I try to put it all together, there's this emptiness that won't go away." I sat there, listening, my heart aching for him. I never realized how much he had been holding inside. Charles had always been the strong, independent one, the one who kept his emotions buried under layers of humor and charm. I had never seen him this raw, this vulnerable. And yet, in a strange way, I was grateful for it. Grateful that he had come to me, that he trusted me enough to show this side of himself. "I've never told anyone this," he continued, his eyes cast downward, avoiding mine for a moment. "But I feel like I'm failing, like I'm letting everyone down, and I don't know how to fix it." I could feel his pain in every word. I wasn't sure how to comfort him, how to tell him that he wasn't failing, that life wasn't about getting everything right or following some perfect path. But I didn't want to say something that might feel empty to him, something that didn't acknowledge the depth of what he was experiencing. So I just let him speak. Let him unravel all the parts of himself he'd kept hidden. "I know it's not fair to you," he added, glancing up at me with those same vulnerable eyes. "But I don't know what to do with myself anymore." It hit me then. I had been so caught up in my own quiet life, in my own memories, that I hadn't realized how much Charles had been struggling. It wasn't just the pressures of being a young man in the world. It was the weight of expectations, both his own and those that others had placed on him. He was carrying so much, and yet he had never shown it. Until now. I squeezed his hand tighter, offering him what little comfort I could. "Charles, listen to me," I said softly. "I don't have all the answers, and I'm not going to pretend that life is easy or that it will magically get better overnight. But you're not failing. You're just figuring it out, and that's okay." He looked at me, his expression softening. "But Grandma, what if I don't figure it out? What if I keep feeling like this forever?" I could feel the lump in my throat as I fought back my own tears. I had lived a long life, seen so many things, and yet here I was, struggling to find the right words for the young man in front of me. But I knew what he needed. He needed to hear that it was okay to be uncertain, that it was okay to not have it all figured out. "It's okay to not have all the answers," I whispered. "We never really do, Charles. Life isn't about perfection. It's about growing, about learning from the mistakes, the heartache, the quiet moments, like this one. You're not alone in this. I'm right here." His eyes filled with emotion as he nodded slowly, taking in my words. "You always know what to say, Grandma." "I don't always know," I said with a small smile, trying to lighten the mood. "But I know you. I know you're stronger than you realize." For a moment, we sat there in silence again, the weight of the conversation lingering. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was peaceful in a way, like we had both let go of the things that had been holding us back. I could see the shift in Charles, the way his shoulders seemed to relax, the way his breathing steadied. He wasn't fixed, not by any means. But something had clicked. Something had changed in both of us. "Do you mind if I stay here for a little while?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more grounded. I don't know where else to go. I don't want to be alone tonight." I didn't need to think about it. "Of course, Charles. Stay as long as you need." And just like that, the tension between us melted away. It wasn't about solving his problems or fixing everything in one night. It was about being there for each other, something I hadn't realized I needed as much as he did. I could tell he was exhausted, both mentally and emotionally. I led him to the spare room, made up the bed with fresh sheets, and tucked him in like I had when he was a little boy. It was a small gesture, but it felt important, like I was taking care of him in a way that was just as much for me as it was for him. When I came back to the living room, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night settle on my shoulders. I was no longer just Sarah, the grandmother who had lived a quiet life. I was something more, a person who had just shared something deeply real with her grandson, something that neither of us could ever forget. As I turned off the lights and settled into my own bed, I thought about how strange life could be. Sometimes it took a late-night visit, a few quiet words, and a vulnerable moment to bring people closer, to help them understand that, no matter what, they weren't alone. The morning light came slowly, creeping through the blinds and casting soft shadows across the room. I woke up earlier than usual, as I always do, and lay there for a while, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The events of the previous night swirled in my mind, and I couldn't help but smile softly to myself. There was something different about Charles now, something I couldn't quite put into words, but I knew it was there. I slowly got out of bed, pulling on my slippers, and padded quietly down the hall. As I approached the guest room, I paused for a moment, wondering if he was still asleep. I didn't want to intrude, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. I peeked inside the room. There he was, still asleep, curled up beneath the blankets, his face softer now in peaceful slumber. I stood there for a moment, watching him, and a wave of tenderness washed over me. The boy who had once been so full of energy, who had run around my house causing chaos with his toys, was now a man, struggling in his own way, but seeking the comfort of his family. It was a strange thing, realizing that your loved ones are no longer just children. They are grown, and they carry burdens of their own that you can't always see. I tiptoed out of the room and started making breakfast, the scent of coffee and toast filling the house. The mundane act of cooking, of preparing a simple meal, felt strangely comforting in the midst of everything that had happened. There was something healing about it. When Charles finally came into the kitchen, his hair still messy from sleep, he gave me a small, tired smile. "Morning, Grandma," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Morning, dear," I replied, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. "I thought you might be hungry after last night." He sat down at the table, still rubbing his eyes. He looked at me for a moment, as if searching for the right words to say. I could tell he was still processing everything that had been shared, still figuring out how to move forward. "I'm really glad I came last night," he said quietly, after a long pause. I didn't know where else to turn. "But I think I needed to hear what you said." I needed to hear that it was okay to be lost for a while. I smiled at him across the table, my heart swelling with emotion. We all get lost sometimes, Charles. It doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're figuring out who you are, and that's more than okay. He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. I don't want to be lost forever, though. I want to find my way, and I don't want to feel like this again. You will, I said with certainty. It takes time, and it takes understanding, and you have to be kind to yourself along the way. No one ever has it all figured out. You're still young. You're allowed to make mistakes. What matters is that you keep going. He looked up at me, his expression a little brighter. Thanks, Grandma. I don't know what I would have done without you last night. I don't think I ever realized how much I needed to hear that. I reached across the table and took his hand, giving it a squeeze. You never need to ask. You're family, and we take care of each other, no matter what. We sat there for a while, eating breakfast in comfortable silence, the weight of the night's conversation still lingering in the air, but no longer feeling so heavy. I could feel the connection between us now in a way that I hadn't before. It was deeper, stronger, and more genuine than it had ever been. As the morning went on, Charles and I talked about everything and nothing. He mentioned his plans for the future, the things he was working on, and we laughed at small stories from his childhood, moments that felt far away but still held so much meaning. In a way, it was like we were rediscovering each other, peeling back the layers of time that had kept us apart. When the time came for him to leave, I felt a mixture of sadness and contentment. I knew he had to go back to his own life, to continue his journey, but I also knew that we had crossed a new threshold in our relationship. He wasn't just my grandson anymore. He was a man who had shared his struggles with me and found a little bit of peace in the process. And I wasn't just the grandmother who offered advice and comfort. I was someone who had helped him find the strength to face his uncertainties. Thanks again, Grandma, Charles said, standing up and heading toward the door. I'll never forget last night. I needed it more than you'll ever know. I stood up and walked with him to the door, giving him a warm hug before he left. You're always welcome here, Charles. Don't ever forget that. I won't, he said, smiling. Take care of yourself. I'll be back soon. And with that, he left, stepping out into the morning sunlight, carrying with him not just the weight of his struggles, but a new sense of hope. I closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet of the house settle around me. It was strange, this sense of both loss and growth. But I realized something then. That's what life is about. The moments that leave an imprint on your heart, the quiet conversations, the late-night visits that change everything. And sometimes the people we love come to us when they need us most, not just for answers, but for understanding. And in those moments, we find out more about ourselves than we ever expected. As I sat back down, I felt at peace. I didn't have all the answers for Charles, but I had given him something more important, the reassurance that it was okay to not have it all figured out, that it was okay to be uncertain, to be vulnerable, and to lean on those who love you. In the end, that's all we can really ask for.